In the quiet streets of Egypt, a sinister figure lurked, setting in motion a reign of horror that would shock the nation. This figure was none other than Ramadan Abdel Rehim Mansour, a name that would come to haunt the dreams of many. Born in the year 1980, Mansour's life was far from ordinary, and his story far from comforting. Mansour hailed from a town called Tanta, located in the heart of Egypt. His childhood, like many others, was filled with the usual scenes of play and laughter. However, beneath this facade of normalcy, a darker side was slowly brewing, a side that was as chilling as it was destructive. From a young age, Mansour displayed a troubling predilection for violence. His tendencies weren't the usual scraps and fights that young boys get into. No, they were far more sinister and hinted at a deeply disturbed psyche. His brushes with violence weren't merely episodes of childhood rowdiness, they were early signs of the terror that he would later inflict. His parents, hard-working and honest people, were at a loss. They couldn't fathom the depths of their son's depravity. He was a puzzle they couldn't solve, a riddle they couldn't decipher. And as he grew older, the violence escalated. Petty fights turned into full-blown assaults, and the targets of his anger were no longer just his peers. The local community watched in quiet dread as Mansour transformed from a troubled child into a menacing adolescent. His reputation grew, and with it, a sense of looming danger. The people of Tanta knew that it was only a matter of time before Mansour's violent tendencies would take a more malicious turn. And they were right. The stage was set for a life of crime, a path that Mansour would tread without remorse. The quiet streets of Egypt were about to become the backdrop of a horrific tale, a tale of a man who would become one of the country's most feared criminals. But this was just the beginning, and the worst was yet to come. A life of poverty and hardship shaped Mansour into a ruthless predator, prowling the streets of Tanta, Egypt. In the throes of adolescence, Mansour began to carve out his place in the world, not in the classrooms or the playing fields, but in the gritty underbelly of Tanta. His initiation into a life of crime was neither gradual nor hesitant. It was as if he was born for it, a natural progression for a young man hardened by the harsh realities of his existence. When Mansour wasn't navigating the labyrinth of Tanta's slums, he was orchestrating a symphony of chaos, leading a group of like-minded youths down a path of lawlessness. They were the outcasts, the forgotten, the ones society had left behind. Together they formed a gang, a brotherhood of misfits, a family bound not by blood, but by shared hardship and a common enemy, the world that shunned them. Mansour's influence over his crew was absolute. He wasn't just their leader, he was their beacon, their guiding light in the darkness. His charisma and cunning made him a force to be reckoned with. He was a puppet master, pulling the strings, manipulating his gang to do his bidding. But as Mansour's power grew, so did his appetite for destruction. Petty thefts and small-time hustles were no longer enough. He craved more. His crimes escalated, becoming more audacious, more violent. The streets of Tanta were no longer just a playground for Mansour, they were his hunting grounds. His victims, innocent bystanders, unfortunate enough to cross his path, were his prey. Mansour was no longer just a thief, a small-time criminal. He had transformed into something far more sinister. He reveled in the power he wielded, in the fear he instilled. Mansour was now a rapist, a murderer, a monster. Mansour's name became a synonym for fear as his reign of terror grew. As Mansour's power grew, so too did his thirst for violence, leading to a terrifying spree of murders that shocked the nation. Ramadan Abdel Rehim Mansour, known to many as Al-Turbini, was not just a criminal, but a harbinger of fear and dread. His reign of terror was a chilling chapter in the annals of crime, targeting the most vulnerable in society, children and young adults. Al-Turbini's methods were as cold and calculated as they were horrific. He would lure his victims onto the rooftop of a moving train, where they would be trapped, unable to escape. The train's constant motion and loud noise masked the horrendous acts taking place above, while the victims' screams were swallowed by the rushing wind. His crimes were not random acts of violence, but meticulously planned and executed operations. Mansour would carefully select his victims, often choosing those who were alone or seemed easy to manipulate. This chilling attention to detail only added to the community's growing fear. The horror Mansour instilled was pervasive. Parents were afraid to let their children out of sight. Young adults were wary of late-night travels, and everyone lived in a constant state of unease. The community was gripped by a fear so palpable it was almost suffocating. But it wasn't just the fear of being targeted that haunted people. It was the gruesome nature of Mansour's crimes, the utter lack of remorse, the chilling pleasure he seemed to take in his acts, that turned him into the embodiment of terror. Stories of his crimes spread like wildfire, each more horrifying than the last. The community was held hostage by a fear that was almost tangible, a dread that seeped into every corner of their lives. The reign of terror seemed endless, and with each passing day, the dread grew. Each new report of Mansour's crime sent shockwaves of fear through the community, a stark reminder of the monster in their midst. In the face of such brutality, the question remained: when would this reign of terror end? Every reign of terror must come to an end, and for Mansour, justice was closing in. As the sun rose on one fateful day, the wheels of justice had started to turn for Ramadan Abdel Rehim Mansour. The cat-and-mouse game he had been playing with the authorities was about to reach its dramatic climax. The law enforcement had been tightening the noose, their relentless pursuit finally leading them to the man who had cast a dark shadow over their city. Once apprehended, Mansour was thrust into the spotlight, his monstrous deeds laid bare for the world to see. His trial was a spectacle that held the nation in its grip. Each revelation was more horrifying than the last, the magnitude of his crimes leaving the public in a state of disbelief and dread. Mansour's reign of terror was meticulously dissected, each piece of evidence painting a chilling portrait of the man. Witnesses recounted their encounters, their voices trembling as they relived the nightmares he had inflicted upon them. The courtroom was filled with a palpable tension, the air heavy with the weight of his atrocities. In the year 2010, the gavel finally fell, sealing Mansour's fate. The sentence: execution. An inevitable end for a man whose acts of violence had stolen the innocence of a city and left a trail of devastation in his wake. The news of his execution was met with a collective sigh of relief. The monster had been slain, but the horror of his deeds lingered on, a grim reminder of the terror he had unleashed. In the aftermath of the trial, the public faced a harsh reality. Mansour's gruesome tale was a stark reminder that monsters walked among them, their faces hidden behind masks of normalcy. The scars left behind by Mansour's reign of terror were deep and unhealing, forever etched in the hearts of those he had victimized. Finally, the monster was no more, but the scars he left behind would never fully heal. The legacy of Ramadan Abdel Rehim Mansour was a grim testament to the darkness that can lurk in the human soul. The darkness had lifted, but the aftermath of Mansour's reign of terror would linger for years to come. With the conclusion of Mansour's dark chapter, a new dawn broke, leaving the community grappling with the chilling echoes of his crimes. The victims, their families, and the community at large were left to sift through the wreckage of a life that was once familiar, now tainted by the haunting spectre of Mansour's deeds. The wounds were deep, both physical and emotional, and the healing process was a journey fraught with pain. For the victims, their lives would never be the same. The repercussions of Mansour's crimes rippled through their existence, casting long shadows on their futures. Their families too bore the weight of his actions, their lives irrevocably altered in the aftermath. The community, once a tapestry of camaraderie and trust, was left fragmented. The sense of safety and security, once taken for granted, was shattered, replaced by a chilling unease that permeated their daily lives. Yet in the face of such adversity, a resilience emerged. The community banded together, their collective strength a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. They sought to rebuild, to heal, to move forward, but never to forget. And from the ashes of Mansour's reign of terror emerged a profound change. His crime served as a stark wake-up call, forcing a re-evaluation of the legal system. Measures were put in place to ensure the protection of the vulnerable and the swift justice for the guilty. His case became a lesson in the pitfalls of complacency and the importance of vigilance. In the aftermath, the community learned the invaluable lesson of unity in adversity. They understood the importance of standing together against the face of evil to ensure that the horrors of Mansour's reign would never be repeated. In the shadows of this horror, society was forced to confront the monsters within, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of men.